Remember when Five Nights at Freddy's said it was only gonna have 3 games? I can see another indie horror franchise following closely in its footsteps. Welcome to my abyss. I'm wearing a mask because I don't like stalkers. I usually don't do any commentary anything, but I felt so strongly about this that I just needed to get it out. Introducing, but not really, Hello Neighbor, an indie horror game that came out fully in 2018, had a couple of spin-off games, and has a Hello Neighbor 2 on the way. Oh, and not to mention the 6 books it has, with the 7th on the way. I mean, FNAF has 13 books that are supposed to be put out, with 6 games and a 7th baking. There could be at least a 30-minute long video explaining why FNAF should have logically and in the most satisfying way ended on Ultimate Custom Night. But that's a story for another day. Let's talk about Hello Neighbor, specifically the books. This franchise is apparently very happy in following the less than admirable footsteps of Five Nights at Freddy's, endless games, spin-offs, and lore galore. I'm not excited for this new 7th Hello Neighbor book, and here's why. Milking a game to the end of its limits ultimately makes a franchise less enjoyable. You know the feeling of when you watch an epic movie for the first time. Adrenaline is running and you're on the edge of your seat, and finally when it ends, you're left satisfied, maybe wanting more. Then there's a sequel, and another one, and another one. You know the feeling of that too, watching a sequel that is less than the quality of the original. A disappointing feeling. And in turn, those sequels seem to undermine the original story, movie, whatever it may be. What is it about sequels that make them seem so bad? There are 5 most commonly accepted reasons why, but the ones that are applicable here are only 3. Sometimes main characters don't return for a sequel, or in this case, a prequel. This is absolutely the case with the Hello Neighbor books. There are the main characters, Nikki, Enzo, Maritza, Trinity, and in some sense, Aaron as well. Aaron gets his own series despite being more of a MacGuffin character. Those characters simply exist to propel the plot. They're not exactly supposed to be expanded upon. They're supposed to remain mysterious. However, this new book, Reset Day, seems to suggest a whole new storyline with whole new characters. And don't even get me started about Bosco Bay. No main characters appear in that book, with the exception of Mr. Peterson, but he's in every book, so. Another reason why sequels don't do as well is because they're usually the basic storyline of the first part, but more watered down. These books, and that one, all have something in common. In the most basic sense, it's about a group of friends who try to uncover the secrets of Mr. Peterson. Usually one of them has some type of grudge against Mr. Peterson. The first trilogy, Nikki's arc, does this very well, and I thought it made the narrative very simplistic, and I could understand it now. I could understand the story of Hello Neighbor. It's about a group of friends who try to uncover the secrets of Mr. Peterson. And Nikki has this grudge against him. He's trying to figure out what happened to Aaron, his best friend. However, then Aaron's trilogy came out. It has a similar story, except with Aaron this time, of course, and it's still about a group of friends who try to uncover the secrets about Mr. Peterson. And this time Aaron has more of a grudge, but it's not exactly a grudge, it's more like they have a difficult relationship. Then Bosco Bay. A group of friends try to uncover the secrets of Mr. Peterson. Jen has a grudge against him because she thinks he has something to do with her missing brother. It's clear to see that these books all have the same basic storylines. And while you can argue it's for consistency, there are other ways to keep a story consistent without making it feel repetitive. Based on these observations, I have to assume that this new book is going to be more or less the same. Another reason why sequels do worse is because there's too big of a time gap between the original story and the sequel. This is also absolutely the case with this new book. As is clear from the cover, Reset Day is supposed to be around in present day, if not 2 years before or after, like right now. I remember Nikki's storyline happened in about 1995 to 1996. Aaron's was around 1992, I believe, and Bosco Bay around 1983. I can give a pass to these prequels because they're relatively in the same era. Relatively. But this 7th book is at least 20, 25, maybe even 30 years into the future, with no context of what happens in between. I like to entertain an idea of a present-day Hello Neighbor. There's just one problem. There's no closure. Unless Nikki makes some type of cameo in this new book, I doubt any of the characters will get any closure. Nikki's and Aaron's arc just ends with them in the basement. Of course, there's Act 3 of the game, but we're still left with so many questions. What happened to Aaron? What about the 20 plus years that go by without any context between what happens in Book 3 and Act 3 of the game? If any of the main characters, other than Mr. Peterson, do show up in the 7th book, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, because these are literally just assumptions. I'm just stating what I have observed. I'm making my assumptions from what I've observed from the other books. Speaking of closure is important, and it is especially important in fiction. That completion, that satisfaction. Initially, I had thought after Buried Secrets that there would be more books to expand on what happens afterwards. Closure. Then I learned there was a 4th book coming out, and I was like, yes! But it was about Aaron. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool, I suppose. Then I lost interest altogether. Then Bosco Bay came out. There was still no closure. By the looks of things, I sincerely doubt that the 7th book will give any closure to any of these main characters. There are proper ways to do closure without completely, finishing a story. Wow, what was that? Without completely, finishing a story. Even if there are some loose threads and a larger story arc still in development, a series novel can tell and wrap up a complete story from start to finish. Each Harry Potter novel is a great example of this. Closure means the mechanics of the story make sense, not that evil is explained away or completely vanished. This ties back to the huge time gap. There's no longer any room to explain. That sounds contradictory, but let me explain. If you map out the future of your story without even understanding the present of your story, as in, if this is the timeline, here and here, this is present, this is the future of your story. If you already know what happens over here, but you don't know what happens in between, there are obviously going to be so many huge holes into your story. Holes that won't have closure. These are very different than loose ends. The future mapped out, without even taking in account the holes that you've already created. As in, since you already know what happens in the future, but now you don't have the chance to explain the holes that you've already created, then yikes. However, I don't think this is the author's fault. She is given the story to work with. She's given the plot points. She's given this is this and this and this and this is what needs to happen, and she just does some creative liberty, writes a story around those basic things that they said that need to happen. So I don't think this is really her fault. The only way that this new book would have satisfying closure is if, one, Nikki has some type of cameo in this, like to explain what happened to him in the last 30 years. If it somehow kind of explains Hello Neighbor 2, which I think it was going to do already, but I don't know. And if it reveals that this guy is Aaron. That may seem confusing, but I can't really explain it right now. That's a theory for another day. Because of the lack of closure and the other reasons I've mentioned, I'm not excited. Sure, it may be a new story or new lore, but do you really have to have your lore stretched out between 7 books? I mean, look at this. These books could be easily condensed into one 300-page book. I mean, look how big the text is. Oops, I wrote on that. Look how big the text is. And even if it might be because there just has to be so much just packed into all these 7 books, I think I know the real reason. Yeah. Wouldn't be as much profit having it all in one book, but profit's what it's all about, right? With that being said, you can have your own opinions, but I'm sticking to mine. I've already distanced myself from the Hello Neighbor fandom, kind of, slightly, because of these excess convoluted storylines. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on this fandom. In fact, it's like the opposite. It's quite the opposite. I care about it too much to let it fall down the same path that Five Nights at Freddy's did with all these storylines that just too much. If you're excited for it, I'm glad that you can be excited for something that I can't, because you're probably a much happier person. Plus there'd be 12 books, a 4th trilogy. That would be great.
Oh wow, it's editing me. So, while I was editing this video, a user on Tumblr called Ask Cassandra GF version 2 recently brought to my attention that there is going to be a second graphic novel. So, I didn't really know if it was real or not. Not that I didn't trust the source, but I just wanted to see with my own eyes, you know? So I looked it up, and lo and behold, it's real. And to be honest, I hate this description. I hate what it implies. I just don't really like the premise. Like, why would you make a book about something that seems like it could be made with a one shot, you know? Like, this is literally like, could be made into like one scene. But supposedly this ties directly into the second Hello Neighbor game, which I initially thought was supposed to be Reset Day that tied into that, but I guess not. So now this stretched out one-shot looking thing is going to be the source of lore for this new game. So I'm excited. Totally. Okay, bye for real now.